Hi everyone, it's Sydney, and for this assignment I've chosen a passage from chapter 19, and this is how it goes. Then she saw all the colored people standing up in the back of the courtroom, packed together like a case of celery, only much darker than that. They were all against her, she could see. So many were there against her that a light slap from each of them would beat her to death. She felt them pelting her with dirty thoughts. They were there with their tongues cocked and loaded, the only real weapon left to weak folks, the only killing tool they were allowed to use in the presence of white people. So first off, I'd like to begin with talking about the summary of the passage, just in case some of you guys don't know what just happened. So right now, Janie is in the court with everyone, and they are deciding whether she is guilty or not of murder or either self-defense. Everyone does not believe that TK, her last husband, would attack her or harm her in any way because of the way that he treated her. He treated her with respect and dignity like a wife should receive, unlike her other husbands. Another part is the narrative. So the narrator seems to be describing how the courtroom views Janie, and they are seen to be very judgmental because of the way that they see her and the way that she sees the looks on their faces and probably the body language, although it was never described. Narrator says they were all against her, they could see. So this just goes to show that they were not in favor of her and thought that she was not innocent. It is written in third person, which serves as a continual discussion about Janie's life in the narrator's view, not just Janie, so this just shows two sides of Janie's life. Another major part of this passage is the language. There are many phrases that stood out to me personally, and one was tongues cocked and loaded. And the first question that popped into my head was, why would the author use this line specifically? Like, there's many other lines that the author could have used, why this one? And I believe that the author chose this one because of a symbol that it presents. And to me, the symbol is a gun. A gun is a very powerful weapon, and once you get shot by one, you are wounded, whether it's mentally or physically. So this is just like Janie, because the words that are shooting out of the mouths of everyone in that courtroom are aiming for Janie, whether they're just whispers or they're yelling at her. They would wound her in a way because they're probably mostly hateful. And so this will destroy her self-esteem, her feelings, her emotions, and what she thinks of herself. Unfortunately, is not a good thing. Another phrase is killing tool. I find this is very significant because it describes words as a killing tool, which means that it has the power and the force to kill something in its way. Not literally, but to destroy feelings or anything like that. It brings out a very strong message that words can hurt more than actions. And even though these two words are not exact oxymorons, they contradict each other. A tool can be seen as something that builds something up bigger and stronger, but then kill can refer to destroying something and tearing it down. And finally, the last line that I believe is very effective and meaningful was, so many people were there against her that a light slap from each of them would beat her to death. This portrays a very meaningful message, and I believe it was very intelligently thought. It shares a deep meaning of the hatred that is shared throughout the room and the abuse that they are thinking about. How does the sentence develop an image and relates it back to the previous chapters or scenes? This sentence relates back to the other times when Janie was beaten by her second husband, Joe. Whenever Janie did something wrong or went against Joe's wishes, he would slap her. Thus, this line brings us to the idea that all black women were probably abused most of the time for not either listening or obeying their husbands or any other authorities' orders. Another point about this passage is the discerning patterns, so the metaphor. Packed together like a case of celery. When this image pops into my head, I obviously think of celery, and whenever you see celery, they are tightly packed together and they are stiff and there's not very much movement within the package. This just brings forth the true meaning of this metaphor and relates it to how packed the balcony would have been. in the courthouse for all the African Americans. To me, this metaphor is a choppy sentence because it's only itself. It's a phrase, so it couldn't really stand by itself, but I believe that the author wanted to emphasize this metaphor, so it did that. I believe that it shows that the blacks had to stand for every court situation, no matter what. They always had to be separated from the whites who were on the floor. And then this just shows the difference between the whites' privileges and the blacks. The next thing I would like to talk about is the syntax, which is the arrangement of words. The order of words starts off talking about her witnessing her own race discriminating against her and judging her. And then it finally goes and talks about the whites and how they influence the blacks of what they can or can't do. To me, this passage comes off very negative, and there are many feelings I get from reading this passage that make it more negative, like how it comes off as a depressing, calm, upsetting, and weak tone. I believe it's also negative because the other blacks, Janie's own race, as mentioned, is going against her, which I believe is not fair in Janie's part. So it creates sadness for her, which also adds on to the negative effect. The next part I'd like to talk about is the context, which is the history behind the passage and the whole book itself. So from one line, colored people standing up in the back of the courtroom. So back then, whites were seated on the floor closest to the judge and the jury, while the blacks were seated on top of the balcony. The white race would always determine the fate of the African Americans when it came to court. This demonstrates the segregation of the different races in the 1930s. The only killing tool they were allowed to use in the presence of the white folks is also another quote that was used. With the whites around, the blacks had to be very careful with what they said, because if they said something against discriminating the white culture or said something and the whites interpreted it the wrong way, then they could be punished. White people had the power over every African American, whether they were male or female, which proved dominance of the white people, and if you were ever to go against them, it would be very difficult to support yourself. And finally, the main thing I'd like to talk about is the theme. The theme is very essential for any book, poetry, short story, or anything, because it portrays a message for everyday life, and it could help people who are struggling in that kind of a situation in real life. So the theme I developed for this passage was, there are times when life will go against you, but you must become stronger and overcome the challenges and be the driving force that will turn your life around. So we see this in Janie because she remains quiet at the courthouse even though people are probably yelling at her, whispering and yelling names at her. Although this isn't mentioned in the book, I believe that she had faith in herself, that she can overcome this if she just believes in herself. She also remains silent, and the narrator explains, she made them see how she couldn't ever want to be rid of him. She didn't plead to anybody. She just sat there and told, and when she was through, she hushed. This quote from later on shows that Janie didn't go out of her way to prove her innocence, and she knew that no one would listen to her anyways. And also to add on, the only reason why she was released and not put into jail was because she was given evidence from her doctor, who was white, and said that Tea did actually have rabies. But I believe that if a black man was trying to defend Janie and said that Tea had rabies and that he was a threat, I believe that the court wouldn't really acknowledge that and would still put Janie in jail. This is a very insightful passage that relates many other current instances together, which is very key to any novel because as it connects things together, it makes the reading more understandable and you get the message more quickly. I believe the theme can not only relate to Janie as the character, but to anyone else in the world who experiences this situation. Anyways, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.